Hello, everyone out there in podcast land. Welcome back to Adventure Capital, where we not only discuss the entrepreneurial journeys and adventures with founders who have raised capital on WeFunder, but also the different resource providers and mentors helping founders along the way. Huzzah! Today we have Josh Simons of Vamper, the #1 professional network for musicians and creatives in the world. Sounds like the place to be. WeFunder gang, take it away.
Today we're talking to Josh Simons, CEO, founder of Vamper. Josh, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself? Because I'm curious on how an Australian comes to be living in America, and then also the overview on Vamper.
Sure. Well, I hope to those of you who have heard this story before, I'll keep it as brief as possible because we repeat this story a little bit throughout our campaign. But nevertheless, so I was in a band in Australia in like the early 2010s, whatever you call them.
What's the name?
The band was called Buchanan, and in Australia we were, quite large, and everywhere else we were nothing. And after sort of, getting to do cool things like playing national tours and getting on TV and the radio, I thought, well, I have dual citizenship. I'm also an Englishman. I was born in England. I want to take what we're doing in Australia and do it over in England and see if we can, replicate the success in a larger market. Once I got there, it turns out no one gave a shit. And the reason no one really cared was certainly not for, lack of talent or passion or drive even. It was because I didn't have a team. And it became sort of bleedingly obvious to me that things like LinkedIn and existing solutions, to help people build teams in creative fields basically sucked, ineffective, not efficient, especially when you're living in a city that costs a lot of money and you want a quick result and you can't afford to spend 3 or 4 years building up those relationships. What kind of network should exist to solve that? And that was kind of the aha moment. Maybe it's time to make a platform that addresses that problem. And that started off what is now sort of been a 7-year journey and taken me to America, where we launched the product in sort of 2016 or 17, and ultimately, becoming a citizen and growing the company to 26 team members. And it's been a wild ride, frankly, for the last decade.
Can you dig in a little further? Was this just created for musicians, or is it all types of creatives that you work with?
That's a great question. So when we came up with the idea, it was very much about like connecting, the bass player with the guitarist and, the drummer and the singer and the producer. And so it very much did start just as a music concept. But it didn't take very long before we started getting quite a lot of, demand for adjacent creative professions, things like graphic designers, animators, film directors, basically any creative service that touches music, which is basically all of them. So for a while we started adding categories and like letting certain groups in, like we started letting managers in and agents in, and then we hit a point where we realized we really can't be the gatekeeper anymore. And so these days we let users decide what their job title is, and we have 27,000 different skills on the platform, which is just mind-blowing to me. And that, it went from 50 to 27,000 in about 6 months after opening those floodgates. In fact, one of our WeFunder raises, I think the first one we did, the whole reason we did that particular round was to rebuild our infrastructures to support that new system. And we knew that that was going to be an expensive build. And we sort of had it quoted out and quite extensively planned. And yeah, that's what we used the capital for in that first crowdfund.
One question is it's interesting, like there is LinkedIn, right? LinkedIn is like network for professionals. So I'm curious as to why you felt there was a need or what the value proposition is. And it's probably very obvious to you, but for someone that is kind of outside of it, what's the value proposition of building a network that's kind of focused on, one industry, music or creatives, versus just why can't people use LinkedIn? And then I guess related, like as you go from 50 skills to 27,000 skills, then is there a risk that you kind of become too generic and you kind of become another LinkedIn?
Yeah, all great questions. I'll try and unpack them one by one. So when you look at LinkedIn, it's very much a resume-based platform. It's scroll and click. It's not particularly sort of audiovisual discovery, which is kind of the unique requirements of creative people. It's the sort of the ability to not judge them so much on what places they've worked at in the past, or how many runs they've had on the board, although that does play a part of it. It's much more about assessing them. Like, do they look like they fit in part of my tribe? You know, what's their sound like? What's their quality of performance like if you're looking at a musician, or if you're looking at a graphic designer, what's their portfolio look like? So we need a platform, creatives need a platform that allows them to sort of, job hunt or personnel solve. I always talk about it solves personnel problems. They need a platform that does that, but one that is tailored for their needs. And I think, the stats back it up. So between 8 to 12% of the global workforce works in creative adjacent industries. And yet on LinkedIn, they only make up 4% of the user base, which means that that's just telling that basically creatives aren't really screwing with LinkedIn. They're not really enjoying the experience. It doesn't work for our unique needs. So that's the answer to the first part. The answer to the second part, as to, is there a risk of people getting lost? That's a brilliant question. We're still figuring out how to make sure people still have to select one of our, we've got a much longer list now, about 100 categories or so. And they're macro, but they're micro enough that most people will find at least one useful. And when you're inputting your skill types, you can put as many custom skills as you like, but you still have to choose one of our, we just call them Vamper skills. We don't actually call it that. We call it, I think the section says, what do you do? And so you will always fit into at least one category that's on our graph database. So when our machine learning algorithm does a search, it's always going to bring back, like, no one's going to be ever completely hidden altogether because they've chosen something completely obscure. They will always pop up to someone. So in the future, I'd like to think we can get a little bit smarter than that. We've already started I don't want to get too technical, but a process called mapping, where we let people put in a custom skill, but we kind of know that it's probably actually closer to something else that's a bit more, there's in a bubble with more people. Again, we're sort of getting down the hole of how graphs work a little bit here, but we're working on that consistently, concurrently also with improving our algorithm, which is getting smarter and smarter and better at matching people at the various stages of their career. It's one of the other things that, creative platforms people think they need is, like, when you first sign up, the ability to say what skill level you're at. Like, everyone always wants to say, I'm a semi-pro, for example. But a lot of people who think they're semi-pro are probably more actually just hobbyists. And, when we first launched Vamper, for example, we let people choose, and everyone just chooses semi-pro. And so it became useless. And so that's another thing that LinkedIn doesn't really have. So then we base it more on a system now of, like, algorithmically detecting, like, whose profile is popping. Our job really is to connect 10s with 10s and 5s with 5s. And everywhere along the way. And that's where we're headed. And I think it's that magic of that algorithm that makes Vamper so special and why people love it.
That's super cool. I'm popping around on your website, and you have a really cool live ticker on the bottom that shows you have almost 56 million swipes on Vamper and just over 7 million connections made. That's super significant. So I guess another two-part question. Can you talk a little bit more about how it works? Is it like Tinder? And also, how do you make money on all of these connections?
Yeah. So I love that we show those figures, because, like, and especially actually it's something that we've started doing more of since we started crowdfunding, where, of course, with crowdfunding, if you're doing 2 in a year, you need to get an audit. And so we started to become this very transparent company, and we're like, you know what, if we're going to wear transparency as a badge of honor, let's go the full hog. And
that's awesome.
Yeah, and so we now actually wear it, as I say, as a badge of honor, and show as many stats as we can throughout various parts of our experience, from the homepage to the app itself. But anyway, so how does it work? It started off like a Tinder one-to-one system. Now, the problem with Tinder systems, and I learned this the hard way in the first 3 years of the company, is you can't really build a network now, or a community rather. So Tinder, that doesn't matter, because you're going there to meet an individual. And you're going there for a result of some kind, and you'll come back for that same result, presumably time and time again. assuming you don't get married or partner up. Now, with Vamper, of course, people might come and find a bass player, and then what if they then need a drummer, and then a band manager, and you want to bring them all together? And so we realized we actually need to have some community features. So we looked at all of the swipe apps in the market that everyone knows, like your Bumbles and your Tinders and all of that. And by the way, I just kind of skipped a step. We chose Swipe as a way of searching through people because it gamifies the networking experience, which is it's daunting for anyone in any industry, but it's especially daunting for people in creative industries because they are being by virtue of putting their art into the world. And so it's important to make it feel a bit more fun, less intimidating, and also put in other safeguards like no downvote button, strict profanity filters, and various other things that we do to make sure that people aren't abused. So sorry, I've been on a little tangent there. Back to the question. So we looked at all the big swipe apps, and no one had ever successfully transitioned from a one-to-one closed network where people were connecting directly with one another to a more open network like what you get with LinkedIn and Facebook. And so we sort of had, I guess, the audacity to attempt to make that transition. And it's been like a 3-year transition. We did not do this overnight. It's ongoing. It's like a work in progress. People love the swipe element. It's not going anywhere, but how do you make that work in a network where you can also just search someone's name and add them that way, or just follow them? And so it's been really tricky, but I'm so proud of my team. I really mean that, in navigating two, in many ways, opposing concepts and managing to glue them together. As to how we make money, it's not too dissimilar than how those two different kinds of networks make money. So we have a pro service called Vamperpro, and that's a subscription service that 3% of our active users sign up to, which is just on target for last year's projections. We're hoping to grow that to about 4.5% by December. That basically gives you a suite of about 9 additional tools that help you, connect with more people. You get a higher royalty rate if you're using Vamper distribution. You can add more content to your profile. You get a nice shiny badge to show that you're serious, and all these sort of things that you get when you pay for a premium service on these services. And then the 97% who aren't paying, we monetize them through ads, which is a really exciting sort of new thing that we've just launched. Exciting for us, probably less exciting for the users, although we do curate our ads and we don't just use AdMob or anything like that. We actually spent about 6 months trying to find the right person who had all the relationships to go out there and bring real value adds to the community. So, we're working with companies now like MXL Mics, Cali Audio. In the past, we've done things with BBC and Atlantic Records. So we're trying to bring opportunities to our users, but, charge for the ad space. And so between those two streams, that makes up the bulk of our revenue. And then we launched an IP side of the business called Vamper Publishing last year. We spent 12 or just over 12 months building that catalog up. It's now 50,000 strong, which is like probably, we believe it to be the fastest growing catalog of songs in history. Song Trader probably had that title before us. They didn't get to 50,000 as fast as we did, that's for sure. Now our job is to actually turn that into money for our users, and Vamper takes 35% of whatever we generate for them, which is also better than the market rate, which is usually about 50. As in better, more favorable to the artist. So that's a really exciting side of the business. I always say to the staff, we shouldn't include that in the projections, and we don't, because the truth is that could either be a hit or it could be a miss. We just don't really know yet. It's way too premature to declare that, but we've got, high hopes for that side of the company.
Totally. Wow. You guys have rolled out, it sounds like, a lot of different products, different ideas, different things adjacent to the core product over the last, I guess, 7 years. Do you have any biggest learnings over the course of those last 7 years in terms of, I guess, like continuing to strengthen the community? Like, what's been consistent for you guys on that front?
Yeah, the one thing that you can guarantee the community will always respond positively to is new product, but not just product for the sake of product that actually enhances the experience. And one thing that we have done over the 7 years, I will say, is we transitioned quite consciously from being a gut-based decision-making unit to a data decision-making unit. And now I would say 0 decisions are made on gut and 100% of decisions are made based on data. We became a data company as opposed to a music company when we started. That was a big learning curve for me, and it sort of happened while we were struggling a little bit back in 2018. We were running out of money. We knew what the blueprint should look like. We'd learned all of these lessons, made all these mistakes, but we didn't have the money to do what, make all the changes we knew we had to make. Crowdfunding saved our ass, frankly, because if we hadn't have done that $500,000 round in the end of 2019, we probably would have just had to turn the lights off.
That's the episode title, man. Crowdfunding saved our ass by Josh Simons.
Well, yes. Well, here's the thing. So we had a term sheet with a very, very, very famous investor in about January 2018, and at the very last minute, it fell apart, and we probably should have died. But I had always maintained two budgets: one, sort of a full scale, we're going full steam ahead, and then a very lean, keep the lights on budget. And I wasted no time switching to the keep the lights on budget. And in that time, I got to know Jonny and the team at WeFunder. And it also gave me and Barry, my co-founder, time to refine the blueprint of what we wanted to do, spend a little bit of money to bring a designer in to, mock it up so that we could actually show it to people and present the vision, not just with words, but, visually. And ultimately we clawed our way back. But, those were our trough years, as far as I'm concerned. Not to say that we won't have further troubles or hurdles down the line, but it's ongoing. But those years we really shouldn't have survived. And I think if it weren't for crowdfunding, we wouldn't. And the cool thing is that first round, the majority of the people who invested were our users, which to us said they want to see this work. They probably also know that we've struggled because we haven't updated the app for a while. But the fact that so many of them helped us fund that first round, because now it's more accredited people, frankly, when we look at who comes in. We can get into that later. But that first round was really like just a big showing of love from our users who wanted to see Vampr survive, which is, very validating.
I'm just kind of live tweeting this verbatim, Josh. This is a lot of quotable stuff here. It's almost like you're a creative or something like that. But we could talk about so much. I'm so curious about the moving from an intuition gut-based company to a data-driven company. There's that amazing, is it an SNL skit where it's the clip of George Bush? No, it's Stephen Colbert, where he's talking about he has more nerve endings in his gut than in his head. It's so good. But anyway, it is.
Here's the thing, though, actually, because every startup probably should be started based on your gut and based on domain expertise.
Totally. You don't have the data when you start.
Correct. Exactly. So, and what we always think our lucky stars is, thank God Barry and I together have 40 years experience in the music industry. And without that 40 years experience, I can tell you what, because as we've looked into other fields, as we've started to expand beyond musicians, we've had to bring experts in from those fields to tell us what those people need. And we've just looked at it and we've gone, holy crap, if we had to do that for all of the stuff that we just brought to the table at the beginning, you couldn't put a price on it. We would never have gotten the company off the ground. So domain expertise is super, super, super critical. But at a certain point, you just mature and you realize, okay, well, we've got, in our case, millions of users. Let's start to really plug in as many data points as possible, and not just for the sake of having the data, because I see a lot of startups doing that too, but actually do it with purpose and with intent, and that's what we do.
Yeah.
In fact, whenever we ship an update now, the longest part of the update process is not the development. It's not even the QA. It's adding all the tracking. It's by far the most complex part of our operation, and making sure it speaks to all of our other, data centers and stuff like that.
I would love to dive deep on that, but the segue from get the crowdfunding rounds and your users kind of basically helping you survive and keep going in when you're at a rocky moment, now kind of transitioning to raising from more accredited investors, as you say. I can't let that segue pass up, so let's jump to that, because this is now your third WeFunder campaign. Maybe kind of talk us through the whole. I'm always interested in the kind of tapestry of fundraising, right? So you've done now 3 WeFunder campaigns, but you've also raised from accredited investors. Was the WeFunder campaign the first one you did? Was that the first outside capital you'd raised, or had you raised from angels previously? Walk us through the whole capital journey of Vampr.
Yeah, cool, happily. So our first ever round was like your typical family friends round. I made a pitch deck. I've got a folder on my desktop that's special and locked. It's called Defining Decks, and it's the decks of all the times that we actually closed a round. So what did the deck look like at the point that we closed each round? And that first one is shockingly bad. Maybe one day.
Isn't it so cool? Like I look at blog posts that I wrote like 10 years ago, you know, and it's like, it's so cool to see like how far you've come and how much you've learned. Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure everyone on this call doesn't spend too much time sitting in the past, but you know, when you've had a long day and you're having a whiskey or whatever, it is nice to sometimes look back and just appreciate yourself for a moment and go, fuck, I've come a long way.
Right.
So yeah, anyway, once in a very blue moon, I'll have a look at those old decks. But so we did this first little small family and friends thing, and I put this scrappy deck together, which fundamentally, when you read through it, even though it looks terrible and the design's awful and nothing, like the fundamental concept of the business has not really changed all that much, which is kind of cool because, you know, many of my other friends' companies had dramatic pivots, you know, to the point that they're unrecognizable. And we've pivoted a lot of our like technology decisions and expanded the product offering, but not really actually changed the core mission
That's
statement.
cool. That's actually interesting parallel with WeFunder. You know, we have the same public benefit corporation charter that we had, I think, in 2012, and you know, we've added a bunch of bells and whistles and grown a lot. But it's actually, that's a really interesting point. Yeah. It's kind of cool.
And so I think we raised, I can't remember, don't quote me, but I think we raised about 270,000 US. I'll just say everything in US dollars for the sake of the majority of the people I presume listening. So I think we did about 270,000 thereabouts. And then we followed that up about 12 months later with quite a bit larger round. And this was our first time working with angels. So I started to lean on some of my music industry contacts because at that point we actually had a working app. You know, we weren't marketing it. We were sort of still finessing things, but it was available. And so we had to raise, I think it was about $800,000 altogether. And it was a long raise. That was a marathon, not a sprint. That was like a 12-month raise where I was picking up checks between $25,000 and $50,000, and it was exhausting. And that's, I'll put my thing on Do Not Disturb so that we don't ruin the quality of the podcast. So yeah, we did that one. That was mainly, I'd call that an angel round for all intents and purposes. A lot of music industry people, friends, you know, and relationships, personal relationships that I'd spent years building up. And then that brings us to our first WeFunder raise. So I think that was our third round technically. And we didn't really know what to even call that round. That was like, as I was saying before, that was like die or thrive moment. And
the survival round.
Yeah, exactly. The survival round. And, you know, we obviously did about 500,000 in that, but it took us like 6 months to raise it. So that was another marathon. But the cool thing with that particular raise was one of the guys who came in with, I think, about a $5,000 check also had a separate, much, much bigger fund, like a VC fund effectively. And I got to know him very quickly, and he was in Louisville, and I flew out there a couple of times and got to meet the syndicate of investors, and I had to present to them. And so while we were raising on WeFunder, we had this concurrent Reg D round, and that wasn't really like the plan going in. We didn't, as I said, we knew what we needed to raise, but we didn't have a sort of plan of how to get there necessarily, except that we were going to lean heavily on our users. So we could call that a community round effectively, because we were leaning to the Vamper community heavily. But then, yeah, we met this one gentleman. We don't know how he found out about it. We believe he was a Vamper user, who then got one of our emails about, hey, we've opened a WeFunder round. But it doesn't really matter. The point is he came in on the crowdfund on a bit of a kind of a punt. And then I took the effort to actually, because I always write back to people who put in checks over a certain amount. And I actually wrote to him and I said, thanks for investing, you know, happy to have a chat. And then he's like, you know, damn, I think there's a chance this company might do some massive things. And so he ended up matching what we did on WeFunder. So we ended up raising $1 million in that 2019 round. And then another 800 the year after. But that's when we started to move into more of the accredited investor land and working with angel syndicates that collectively have quite a bit of power, which we can get into, but I don't know how relevant that is to, you know, a first time crowdfunding person.
But yeah, so you mentioned that you were writing back to investors over a certain amount, thanking them. I think that's a really really good practice that not everybody utilizes when they run a WeFunder campaign. But do you have other lessons that you learned over the course of the 3 different rounds? And I'm sure your strategy evolved from the first to the third.
Yeah. So the thing though, so the first round was like, I learned the secret to how to do it. And then the strategy has definitely evolved, but the actual concept behind it all hasn't changed really much. And that's the concept that I tell everyone whenever I get asked about crowdfunding. And, you know, I do get hit up a lot because I think you guys use Vampr as a use case on the website. But
I mean, we tend to highlight our most physically attractive founders, Josh. So that's why we went to you.
Yes, stop it. You're making me blush, Jonny. Momentum is the key. And I fundamentally believe that momentum is actually the only thing that matters. And if you can getting momentum is probably the hard part, is a hard part. If you lose it, getting it a second time is arguably even harder. But once you have momentum, keeping it going is actually relatively easy. It's a matter of pushing. I use this snowball analogy a lot, that like crowdfunding is like, you're skiing down a mountain, or you're pushing a snowball down a mountain, and if it hits this plateau, it's your job to, like, you know, you have to use a lot of effort, but to get it going back down the hill again. And you know, obviously, like, launch is a good way to draw some momentum, although it's not a given by any stretch of the imagination. And you want to raise as much money as you can in that pre-launch phase. And close is a very strong driver too. But right, you know, if you're going to be doing one of these campaigns for 4 to 6 months, you've got to have stuff lined up in the meantime. And so, yeah, my strategy has evolved. So the first time round, it was like communication with the Vampr community almost on a every other day basis, which we'll never do again. Like, we did it. I'm very proud that we did that. It was exhausting. It made me never want to do another crowdfunding round because it was just so all.
Was it all through email, or what was it? Like email, social?
So yeah, that first round we really leaned into our Vampr user base. The second round, we decided to lean in a bit more on these sort of angel groups, as I was saying. So we worked with like people like angels and entrepreneurs. And I think we might have worked with a couple other lists, but basically, you know, communities of angel investors online that are looking for things to invest in. And because we had history with WeFunder, because we'd had a successful round, it was an easier proposition because they weren't taking a risk on an unknown, like, does this company have the ability to raise? We have a track record. So everything's definitely harder the first time because you don't have a track record and you're a bigger risk, frankly. We're all risks because we're all startups, but nevertheless, you're a higher risk in your first raise. So it does make it tricky. And there are exceptions to the rule. Of course, there's startups that, you know, do get into those lists on their first round and raise $1.5 million in a couple of weeks. It's rare, but it does happen. This time round, I've shifted strategy again. We're kind of taking more of a video strategy, less writing, more communication. And we've also placed a heavier focus on regular updates, although admittedly slowed a little bit in the last couple of weeks. But when we came out the gate, we had updates lined up for like 2 months, and we killed it on that front. I mean, we raised I think we did like $500,000 in 3 weeks or something. Like, we really crushed that opening sprint. And you know, we've got heaps of content coming for the close too. Like, don't get me wrong, it's not like we've gone through it all. We were just waiting for the right time to turn the gas back on a little bit. Although we've, you know, definitely very conscious of not letting momentum completely stall. But right now we're gearing up for the end game. We've set a date. We're really excited. March 31st. We're working towards that with everything we have, and we want to get this thing over $1 million, and I think we can. So yeah, that's probably how the strategy's evolved. I think this time it's been more about communicating with our followers. Also, looking at your ratio of investors to followers on your WeFunder page is critical, because we have 2,500 investors, but I think we have 5,000 followers or something, which means, and don't quote me on those exact numbers, but what that means is that, you know, we could basically, all the money we've ever raised historically on WeFunder, which I believe is about $1.7 million, not including the people that we met since them and through you guys, but about 1.7 million. If we have double those number of people in followers, that's the money that's on the table, right? That's super, super exciting for a founder. So how do you get that? communication. It's really simple. So that's been the focus this time. I've focused less on the outside stuff, pushed a lot of the noise away. I haven't bothered with the LinkedIn outreach that people sort of spam. I get hit up with crowdfunding campaigns every day. I'm sure you guys do too. On LinkedIn. We just don't do any of that stuff anymore, and we just focus on better communication. But of course, you don't have that data, like we were saying earlier, in a different context, but you won't have those many followers when you first start out on WeFunder because you haven't done a previous campaign. So we're in a fortuitous position, but we worked hard to get there. That's how things have evolved.
You one thing I wanted to ask you about that I think is really cool is this investor army. I've used this nomenclature, not with like a capital. I feel like you have a capital I and a capital A, which is awesome. I've talked about like recruit an army of customers and brand ambassadors and stuff, but it's kind of lowercase A. But you've really like leaned into it and you've branded it. Okay, this is our army, and so I'm really curious to dig into that. Like, what gave you the idea for that? Like, how is that going? Like, I think I think I got today the third like army challenge, which I love as well, that you've kind of called it that. But yeah, I'm curious, like the results you're seeing from that and kind of what gave you the idea.
Yeah, so, and this is a good lesson for any founder listening who's considering crowdfunding. We got this idea from another WeFunder campaign, Drone Deck, and they did something similar. And we've just fine-tuned it and done it the Vamper way and branded it up nice and pretty, and as we do. It's the army idea was really about, as we were just saying a minute ago, we've got all these people that are either followers or investors that have their own networks of people. And previously, as you're saying to you, Katie, I'd reach out to people who wrote over a certain check size one by one. We thought, no, there has to be a way to give people that same respect and communication with me without me having to email thousands of people one by one. Mm-hmm. So we thought, let's kind of flip it a little bit and do an army where I'll communicate from my email to these, dedicated investors, and ultimately, hopefully, put them to work to help us get across the finish line quicker. Because that's the whole purpose it's the essence of crowdfunding, isn't it? That, if whatever effort they put in to help me get a result for the company is going to benefit their investment. So we help each other in that way, which I think is beautiful. So far, you asked, has it been a success? Yes. And we've had 200 people sign up in the first, I think, couple of weeks or something. As you said, also, we're up to our third challenge. We're sending challenges that we promise will take no more than a few minutes each week. So they're going to be low-hanging fruit things, but the whole purpose of it is to get them, consistently sharing the Vamper word, because it's, far more effective if 200 people are sharing it constantly and not just Josh and Baz and, whichever team members feel comfortable.
100%. I always say that, like, if you can engage your hundreds, thousands of investors as your marketing team, your army, you get so much leverage, and it's just such an underutilized asset. I think that like so many founders are like trying to do this Herculean work themselves versus like get the leverage of literally hundreds of thousands of people who are like, financially incentivized to help Vamper grow, because that's increasing the value of their investment.
Exactly. And so we're just, it's always, that was kind of, I think, the original essence of crowdfunding, and you guys would be better to tell that story than I would, because you were there at the start. But from my understanding, that is what crowdfunding was meant to be all about. And I would argue that in like the last year or two, with the $5 million raise, whilst that's an incredibly powerful and positive thing, don't get me wrong, it has also attracted a different kind of company into crowdfunding, for better or worse. And we don't need to go down that, quite interesting discussion point, but it's not why we're here today. But I do think that, crowdfunding could afford to come back to its roots a little bit, in so much as I'd love to see companies really galvanize more their investor base, and build that sort of symbiotic relationship, which is what we're attempting to do. I don't know if it's going to add X amount of value. Like, it's really hard for me to say today, but it'd be fascinating to catch you up on that in the future and let you know how that went. The early indicators are that it's going to be great for us. I know it was great for Drone Deck. One other thing I would say too about reaching out I'm not going to name and shame the person, but we had quite a famous NHL player invest randomly. I don't know if you remember this one, Jonny, in our first round, and he cut a check in the tens of thousands of dollars, like on the high end of the tens of thousands. And we were kind of, is this a fake? Is this a fraud? And so I made sure I got on the phone before the end of the day. And no, it was definitely real. And then by the end of the day, someone else in his locker room had put in another check for like 20 grand because I had made the effort to call him. So if there's a lesson, I'm not, that doesn't happen. I mean, I reckon I get about two of them every campaign on average. And we've already had a couple in this one as well. So
can I just make sure that everyone listening kind of is taking away the right takeaway here, which is that like if you do a WeFunder campaign, you'll definitely have multiple NHL players like 20K checks. You'll definitely get connected to a VC who writes a $500,000 check, right? That's like a guarantee of raising on WeFunder. That's what I heard you say, Josh, right?
Unfortunately, FINRA and SEC people, that is not part of the package.
Just kidding.
Of course we are. But no, the lesson out there is that, you put in the effort. It's not a lot of work to email someone after they've, invested $1,000 to say, thank you for investing $1,000. Is there anyone else in your network that you think we should meet? And do you have any questions for me about the company? That gesture alone is enough for people to often just double their investment immediately because you actually got off your ass and send a message. So that's and then if that leads to an NHL player and a VC, power to you, power to us. But yeah, I think that it's those little things that are far more valuable than spending all day growth hacking on LinkedIn. I swear to God, that's not going to work for you anymore.
Love it. Love that.
Yeah, I think that's really great advice. And companies like you that are really doing it to invest in your community and grow that community, I think often tend to have really, really great experiences because it's so, mutually beneficial. It's like the kind of bread and butter of WeFunder. So yeah, sure. Great advice. You guys, like you said, you're 2/3 of the way to your max goal. Obviously, next step for you guys is to get fully funded, which we definitely hope you do. But after that, what is next for Vampr?
Yeah, so we're doing a separate concurrent Reg D round where we're speaking with kind of Series A stage investors, frankly, but we're not talking about that yet because when we do announce it, I think people are going to be quite surprised in a good way. And so that's been a real focus, and it's also taken the pressure off having to, do a killer campaign, even though, I do believe we have run a killer. I think this is our best one by a country mile, but it just means that we can, as I said before, take the foot off the pedal a little bit, focus on the private side a little bit. And then I think that the combination of the two, or the announcement to the public from the private side, will actually spur further investment anyway, and they'll start to benefit each other. So what's next with Vampr is I think we're going to be cashed up quite suitably for the next 18 to 24 months. Our product roadmap is just absolutely mind-blowingly cool and incredible. We're launching an academy at South by Southwest called Music Business Essentials. And that's going to be a new product that we sell at a higher price point than our current Vamperpro, which is interesting in and of itself, but it's also addresses something that we've identified consistently over the years, and now we've quantified with research, data, and a combination, everything in between, really. But which is that there's a real knowledge gap in specifically the music industry, but in generally in creative supply chains, there's a real knowledge gap as to what are rights holders, who do I go to for XYZ. So we're going to be putting a lot of emphasis on this, but we'll have more to say at South by Southwest. And then we've got this marketplace thing coming. So one of the main things that people do on Vampr is transact. They hit someone up and they say, I really like your beats. I'll pay you for one. I've got a project coming out in 2 weeks. I need some sick beats, something like that. And then the guy will write back, or the girl will write back and say, $700 and here's my Cash App, or, Venmo or whatever. Why not allow people to do that safely on Vampr? And there's a demand for it. And it's also could potentially be a very lucrative revenue stream. So we're putting on our big boy pants, frankly, this year. We're really starting to, I think, introduce more ways for the company to make money, but also in useful ways that actually meaningfully benefit the community. And that's what 2022 will look like. Those are the two marquee things that I'm working on and my whole team's working on. And we've got a very clear goal for what we want our run rate to be by December. And everyone's equity incentive options and all that have been updated to rally around this one goal, which is that's a new experiment for the company too. And the whole purpose is that we want everyone to support each other to get to that goal by hook and crook. So I think this is going to be our most exciting year by a country mile. And Jonny, as an investor in Vamper, I'm sure you're excited to hear all of those very positive updates, no doubt.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been really fun to follow along as well with I signed up for the investor army because I was like, this is just so cool. I want to follow along and see what Josh is working on here. And I've just like from, meeting you the first time, just been like super impressed and, how you've kind of built the community and how you've kind of engaged people and run these campaigns. I guess one question to end on that we ask all founders we have on the podcast is, you've been on this journey now for a number of years. WeFunder has definitely not been the kind of, immediately up and to the right hockey stick. We kind of, our founders had to wait 4 years for the SEC to roll out the laws. Then, the laws were not that friendly. And so it was pretty linear growth. Now the growth is picking up, but it took 9 years, right, for us to see this kind of breakout growth. So we kind of have a lot of empathy, I think, for founders that have, been through hard times, been on the roller coaster, like you said, that you were kind of the make or break moment when you did the first WeFunder campaign. So, just curious if you have like one piece of advice, your biggest piece of advice for a founder somewhere on the journey, what would that be?
It's so cliche, but it's so true. If you just keep turning up, that's like 90% of the battle. And really what that means is like perseverance and thick skin. And those are two things that you can absolutely learn as well. They're qualities that you can learn. But I think what unfortunately does happen a lot of times is people don't realize just how hard running a company might be. So they go in, starry-eyed and, quite green. And then when they realize it's hard, a lot of people throw their hands up and say, I can't do this. If I was going to do that, I have moments where I could do that every single day. But then I was probably prepared quite well to be a founder because as a musician, you hear no's every single day.
Mm-hmm.
That's another. I've said this in other podcasts, so I won't repeat myself too much, but I think that there's a really similar characteristics to being a songwriter and to being a CEO, in that they're both problem solving. There's a lot of rejection. There's a lot of collaborating with people. There's bringing teams together to get an output out of thin air. So the transition from one, profession to another was actually remarkably simple. You're using the same brain, the same part of your brain. It's obviously different problems. I'm solving spreadsheet problems these days rather than what note to put where or what word to sing next. Very different problems with different stakes. There's no stake. If a song turns out badly, no one loses $3 million. Nevertheless, quite similar. And so, I've kind of been conditioned to operate in this manner. But perseverance, turn up. It is going to get hard. That's the thing. I've never heard a founder story that wasn't. Elon Musk was 2 days from going bankrupt or something until. Yeah, something like that. So, everyone's got that story, and I've certainly had a couple of them. You just got to keep turning up and, stay fit, go to the gym.
That was just a left field one, just to end on. The songwriter CEO, love it. Yeah. Josh, this has been a really fun and fascinating interview. So
this has been great. Thank you so much for being on.
Oh, wait, I have one more thing to plug. Depending on when this comes out, we've probably got about one of our perks this year. I think we're the first company, as far as we can tell, in the world that's done it as a perk with an equity crowdfunding campaign, an NFT. And we minted 400, and they're all unique. People got very excited about them when we came out at the start of this campaign. And I think there's 40 left. So to get that, to qualify for that, you have to invest $500 or more. It's not a security in its own right. We don't proclaim that it has any value whatsoever. I'll be crystal clear on that. And all those terms are there on the campaign page at wefunder.com/Vamper. But check that out. If you think it looks cool, $500, get your hands on that. You'll be in a very exclusive club of 400 people. So there you go. that's my plug.
Love it. You just about squeezed it in there, man. Love it. This was really fun, Josh. We'll speak again soon, man.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Thanks again.
Josh, that was great, man. Thank you.
I knew it was going to be good with you, Johnny.
Man, I could have gone on it. I really wanted to dig on the like intuition versus data-driven decision-making thing, because that's something I think a lot about. I'm like a total geek. I did management consulting for 6 years. So like Excel analysis, SQL queries, I really am into that. But then I see how like our CEO Nick makes decisions. And even at the stage we're at, I think it's like highly intuition based. It's like the Henry Ford thing, right? Look, if I'd given customers what they wanted, I would have made them a faster horse. And so it's like I just see like Nick making these big, like one example is testing the water.
Can I just make an exception to that before you go? I want to hear the rest of what you're saying, but before I forget, the two features last year that moved the needle the most when we had quite a few flat months in a row, if I'm being honest, even though from the start of the year to the end of the year, we had great growth, we had quite a bit of flat months. The two things that saved that were gut calls that I made. Probably the only two gut calls I made all year. I said, let's introduce a feature called questions and a feature called rooms. And they both happen to be the two most popular things that came out last year. So I still do make occasional gut calls, and education started off as a gut call, but then this is where we've matured. It started as a gut call, but then I tasked my team to do 6 months of research to see if there was demand. And that's where we've changed.
Yeah. One thing I think Nick does really well, I've seen him do this in the past, is like make a gut call on a product and then rapidly shut it down. Right. Like I remember at the start of the pandemic, we launched this COVID loan, recovery loan. And like, I got really excited about it and was like pushing it, and no one was doing it. And literally within 2 weeks, we just invested a ton of time in rolling this out and money and like doing the contract. And within 2 weeks, Nick was like, okay, shut it down. And I was like, no, like it's still coming. And he was making a data-driven like decision then to shut it down, because there wasn't enough data that customers wanted it. But like, it looked like intuition because it was so fast. But for him, like, the lack of data was that because it wasn't exponentially taking off, it wasn't a product that users wanted. And so that was data actually, but it kind of didn't look like data. It looked like gut, but
it's definitely a balance. There's definitely a balance. You need to have, ideas still come out of thin air, but data can then determine how they're executed.
One thing I think is critical is like, when you roll out a feature, then you see how people are using it and you keep iterating on it and you keep like A/B testing it and refining it rather than just like ship it and then forget it.
Well, so we did that with our feed, and I'll admit our feed sucks, but then, you think you got to, Facebook invested like hundreds of millions of dollars into their feed. So like the chance that ours would be as intuitive is never going to be possible. But like we shipped our feed, it sucked. We didn't iterate on it. And then we do quarterly retrospectives with the entire team, because there's like 26 of us now. And in that, everyone identified that, and that forced us to implement a new policy whereby we don't ship and forget anymore. Like if we're not going to commit to iterating and A/B testing, and
then forget it. 100%.
Don't do it.
100%. It's like, why do you spend all this time rolling out the feature and then like you don't spend the time?
I love that. We should implement that.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. I have to run because I've got another meeting I'm late for, but it's so great catching up. We're so excited for tomorrow. By the way, we're going to make a lot of noise about it and a big deal about it. So all of our copies ready to go there. I think that's it.
Love it, man. This was fun.
Awesome.
Thanks again.
Thanks.
Let you know it's slow.
No worries. Good to meet you. See you, Kate, pal.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you for tuning into another episode of Venture Capital. I hope you laughed, took notes, shed a tear, and most importantly, feel ready to go off on your own adventure. And remember, whenever you're ready, We Funders here to help. Be sure to like and leave a review, gang.